CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today. Live from CGTN in London, I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. From the single market to the singles market. 100 days after divorce from the EU, Brexit Britain seeks new partners in trade. Iran says the incident at its nuclear enrichment facility was a terrorist act.
No words can reach into the depth of sorrow that goes into bereavement.
Prince Philip's life is celebrated at church services across Britain. And pint on the patio. The UK prepares to reopen its pubs as coronavirus restrictions are eased, but it will have to be al fresco for now. It is 100 days since the end of the Brexit transition period, when the UK left the European single market to embark on a new trading relationship with its largest economic partner. All this week, we've been looking at its impact so far. Brexit supporters have pointed to the success of the UK's COVID-19 vaccination programme in contrast with the EU's performance. But new non-tariff barriers have led to a clear dip in trade, threatening the UK's economic outlook. And this week's riots highlight the problems facing Northern Ireland, left inside the EU customs area, despite being part of the UK. That's just one area where talks will have to go on, as Paul Barber explains.
It took 4 years of negotiations to get to the Brexit deal reached on Christmas Eve, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. But numerous aspects of the future relationship between the UK and the EU are still being worked out. Over the next 4 years, the Partnership Council, co-chaired by UK Minister David Frost and EU Commissioner Maros Sefcovic, has the power to amend or add to the agreement. The Council has 23 specialised committees, subcommittees and working groups on matters ranging from motor vehicles and parts to fisheries. Some issues are subject to deadlines. June sees the end of the interim measures to allow personal data to flow from the EU to the UK, while the Specialised Committee on Air Transport has until December to examine options to liberalise ownership requirements for air carriers. Other areas are subject to ongoing review by the two sides, as well as the impact of the Northern Ireland Protocol. These include recognition of professional qualifications and levels of agriculture and fisheries subsidies. And of course, there will be continued monitoring of the so-called level playing field, with provisions allowing either side to respond to what it sees as undercutting on environmental and labour standards or provision of state aid by imposing tariffs. And if it's really not working out, the entire trade and cooperation agreement is subject to automatic review after 5 years and can be terminated by either side with just 1 year's notice.
Well, Professor Federico Fabbrini is founding director of the DCU Brexit Institute, and he joins us now from Dublin. Thanks for coming on the programme. So, 100 days in, after all that uncertainty, is the post-Brexit picture any clearer?
Since the end of the transition period, relationship between the EU and the UK have profoundly changed, and the consequences of Brexit are becoming visible. The trade and cooperation agreement negotiated between the parties in 2020 has prevented the introduction of tariffs, but it has not prevented the return of custom declaration. Moreover, the new trade relations does not cover services, it does not allow for free movement of persons, and it's very minimal in many respects. That has already led to an unprecedented drop in UK export to the EU, as well as UK import from the European Union, as certified by the UK Office of National Statistics. And at the same time, the new relationship is also based on the protocol in Northern Ireland, which, as we know and as we've seen in the last few days, has created political controversies. So it is a delicate situation, and the status quo is highly unstable.
So, unstable status quo. There's still teething troubles. It's still very early on. But the impact of Brexit has rather been overshadowed by the pandemic. I mean, how much do you think that the EU-UK relationship could potentially change and adapt in coming years?
The prospect of continuing negotiations between the parties remains strong. The trade and cooperation agreement is a thin deal. As I said previously, it covers only free movement of goods, but it doesn't cover services and other areas. The agreement has a number of transitional periods that apply in specific policy areas, from data protection to fisheries. And indeed, the treaty also has a so-called rendezvous clause, which commits the parties to meet in 5 years' time to renegotiate the terms of the agreement. If you look at the governance structure of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, it creates a system whereby the parties are effectively expected to continue negotiate at technical level in multiple issues. And if you consider what is not covered by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, I think there will be a pressure for the parties to continue engagement in other frameworks, in other fora moving ahead. So indeed, Brexit hasn't happened yet. The process is still ongoing.
It is an ongoing process, and you mentioned talks continuing, certainly on things like financial services, which, as you mentioned, are not part of the trade agreement we've got so far, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I want to talk to you about the future of the bloc and what it really means. I mean, the reality of the UK breaking away, does that make it more or less likely, do you think, that other countries will follow UK's lead?
Brexit has stopped calls by anti-European parties in other member states to quit the European Union. The difficulty faced by the UK in leaving the EU have, I think, decreased the interest by other countries in following that path. In fact, last summer, the European Union made a major leap forward in integration by reaching a deal on Next Generation EU, the Recovery Fund, which, according to many, was also a dividend of Brexit, because with the UK in, perhaps reaching an agreement on that would have been harder. Nevertheless, there are, of course, important challenges for the European Union at 27 moving ahead, from the rollout of vaccine to the rule of law crisis. The EU still has to tackle a number of structural problems within its governance system. And of course, the initiative to launch a conference on the future of Europe, which will kickstart next month, will be an important opportunity in that respect.
So lots of opportunities to address those structural problems in the EU. Federico Fabini, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. Global Britain was one of the main selling points of the Brexit campaign, with an emphasis on stronger ties with the United States. But a closer relationship with Washington has yet to materialise. While the two nations share a language, huge mutual investments and similar global outlooks, the new US president seems to have other, more pressing priorities. CGTN's Nathan King reports.
It's a cliché and largely untrue, but it's been dubbed the special relationship, the bond between Washington and London through World War II, the Cold War, and those in Iraq and Afghanistan have meant relations between Washington and London, especially from London, have been considered unique. Former President Trump openly campaigned for Boris Johnson to become Prime Minister and was a cheerleader for Brexit, but was also notorious for shunning allies. President Joe Biden is the opposite, a keen multilateralist who, as Vice President, objected to Brexit and now as President sees restoring ties with the European Union as a priority. He's also a proud Irish American.
You know my view and the view of my predecessor, of the Obama-Biden administration on the Good Friday agreements. We strongly support them, think it's critically important to be maintained. And the political and economic stability of Northern Ireland is very much in the interest of all our peoples, people-to-people ties.
And just weeks after Biden ordered the White House fountain turn green for St. Patrick's Day, the burning streets of Belfast have alarmed his administration.
We are concerned by the violence in Northern Ireland, and we join the British, Irish and Northern Irish leaders in their calls for calm. We remain steadfast supporters of a secure and prosperous Northern Ireland in which all communities have a voice and enjoy the gains of the hard-won peace.
Boris Johnson was one of the first foreign leaders President Biden spoke to after being sworn in, straight after neighbours Canada and Mexico. But there's no mention of an early visit to the White House yet. That privilege will go to the Prime Minister of Japan. When it comes to trade and investment, the US and the UK have deep ties. According to the US-UK Business Council, and the US and UK are each other's single largest foreign investors, two-way trade tops $235 billion a year, and 2.7 million jobs depend on investment ties. But UK hopes for a bilateral investment treaty anytime soon are fading. Trade deals are popular in the US right now, and so-called fast-track trade authority granted to presidents in the past could be held up in Congress for years. And in her first phone call with her UK counterpart, US Trade Representative Catherine Tai talked only of an ongoing review of negotiations. Fears of US agricultural imports into the UK, such as chlorinated chicken and hormone-raised beef, is also deeply unpopular with the British public. On the approach towards China, there is much more agreement. The Johnson administration has imposed restrictions on 5G leader Huawei and sanctions against China over Hong Kong and Xinjiang, mirroring Washington. On defence, too, there is cooperation. Through NATO, of course, but there's also plans to send the UK's aircraft carrier on a so-called freedom of navigation exercise in the South China Sea, a deployment that will please Washington and anger Beijing. But in reality, the UK is actually cutting defence spending. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and the deep recessions that followed in the US, the UK, and let's face it, many other countries, means all countries, including Washington and London, are looking at domestic problems first. It may be that the UK's global ambitions post-Brexit may have to wait. And the US, too, as it looks out along its shores, is focusing much more on the Asia-Pacific. London, here in Washington, has never seemed quite so far away. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
The UK's other main trading partner after the EU and US is China, but there are no signs of imminent trade talks between London and Beijing. Michele Geraci is a China specialist and Italy's former Undersecretary for Economic Development. I asked him how businesses in China view Brexit.
I think the first analysis is a little bit of a problem for China because, of course, it loses an entry point into the European Union market. So any Chinese investment into the UK, any export into the UK would have then found their ways into the other 26 member states. So this is a little bit of a problem. Having said that, I think the UK is keen to rejuvenate the relationship with China independently from the EU. So I think it's a reset of a relationship. It's not going to be maybe the golden era that we were looking with David Cameron a few years back, but I think given the inertia sometimes of the European Union in making agreements on trade and investment, I think the UK and China have an opportunity to do bilateral agreement in a more efficient way.
So not the golden era, but perhaps a reset. So what kind of post-Brexit relationship between the UK and China do you see shaping up in the coming months and years?
I think the reset is needed because the geopolitical situation has changed. I would call it a silver era, maybe not a golden era. But the United Kingdom, I think, fully understands that the trade deficit, the trade surplus do not matter very much. The UK is very happy to have a trade deficit with almost any country in the world, so to not be focusing on that, for example, very different strategy from that of the United States. And I actually, just a few weeks ago, I heard David Cameron, that of course is ex-prime minister, saying, Chinese investment is very welcome into the UK, even in areas that in other parts of Europe would be raising concerns such as energy, logistics, even telecoms. So I do think that this is an opportunity, resetting it with reciprocity, because the UK company also want to invest in China. So if China opens up the door for UK investment, then it would find a very open back into the United Kingdom.
So in or out of the EU, the UK is open for business. So what does the United Kingdom have to offer China in particular?
It is the biggest financial market in Europe and probably in the world. There is a renminbi settlement. That means a hub for all transnational cross-border M&A. There are some green energy cooperation opportunities. China is going green, and this is a big change. Electric vehicles. We have manufacturing of automobiles in the UK that can be easily and quickly upgraded to the new technology, electric, for example. And of course, we also have the area of technology. The UK, I think, is a thrive investment. We have a very easy way for startup to be set up, and this is exactly the fertile environment that the Chinese company do need. So I think these are the three main areas that China would find the UK a good business partner.
And you can catch up with our special social media show on 100 Days of Brexit over on our website. You'll be able to follow stories of some of the characters who've been telling us how the UK's departure from the EU single market has affected them, from Brixham to Benidorm. All that and more at europe.cgtn.com. Germany's ruling Conservative bloc has met to discuss who wants to run as candidate to replace Chancellor Angela Merkel. Bavarian leader Markus Söder, who's part of the governing coalition, says he's ready to enter the race to succeed her. Armin Laschet, who's a member of Merkel's Christian Democrats, has also declared his bid for the chancellorship. Merkel's been in power for 15 years. The election will take place in September. Iran's atomic agency says its Natanz nuclear facility has been hit by a, quote, terrorist act after a problem with the electrical grid. This comes just a day after the government launched new advanced uranium enrichment at the site. Tehran has been high on the agenda for US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who's in Israel for a two-day visit. CGTN's Stephanie Fried is in Tel Aviv.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's Israel visit kicked off with a meeting with his Israeli counterpart, Defense Minister Benny Gantz. Austin is the first Biden administration official to visit Israel since the new president was sworn in January. On the agenda of the U.S. Defense Secretary's two-day visit, discussions about Iran, regional security challenges, and continued U.S.-Israel cooperation. Austin's visit comes as Israel and Iran exchange skirmishes at sea. Last week, an Iranian military vessel in the Red Sea was damaged by a reported Israel attack. In March, an Israeli merchant vessel was hit by an Iranian missile in the Arabian Sea. On Sunday, Iran announced an accident shut down operations at the country's main nuclear plant a day after the government announced new uranium enrichment centrifuges were going operational. The meetings in Israel come as the U.S. contemplates returning to a 2015 nuclear deal with Iran that was severed by the Trump administration. Israel opposes a return to that deal. Defense Secretary Austin and Defense Minister Gantz discussed maintaining Israel's military edge in the region. Austin is also set to meet Israel's Prime Minister and Chief of Staff on Sunday. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
Still ahead here on The World Today, after another dramatic week of testimony in the United States trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin, we find out what to expect from his defence.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
Welcome back. Let's take a brief look at some other news from around the world. Rescue efforts are underway to free 21 people trapped in a flooded coal mine in China's northwest region of Xinjiang. 8 other miners have already been lifted out. The section of the mine filled with water during its upgrade, leading to power outages and disruption to communication lines. Power and water supplies have been cut on the Caribbean island of St. Vincent after another volcanic explosion. Conditions have worsened in the settlements near the volcano, where thick ashfall has blanketed homes, cars and streets. The Prime Minister has told a local radio station it could take months for life to return to normal. India has started a 4-day vaccination festival to encourage more people to get jabbed after COVID-19 cases surged to record levels. But several states have complained of a vaccine shortage, including Maharashtra. Clinics in the financial capital Mumbai abruptly shut down on Friday because of a lack of doses. Daily case rates have reached record highs 6 times this past week. France is extending the gap between giving first and second shots of the COVID-19 vaccine in order to speed up its inoculation campaign. So far, people have had their jabs 4 weeks apart, but that will soon increase to 6 weeks. The health minister says France can safely do this as they're now vaccinating a younger age group. France has already met its mid-April target of issuing 10 million first doses. Pubs and restaurants in England will be able to serve people outdoors from Monday in the next phase of the country's reopening. Hospitality has been hit particularly hard by the pandemic, but as summer approaches, the sector is placing its bets on al fresco entertainment to see it through. CGTN's Guy Henderson reports.
1,000 chairs now line the public spaces around Chelsea's Duke of York Square. The weather's still a little unpredictable this time of year, so the landlords have added heaters and umbrellas. It's all part of trying to bring consumers back to the high street as England's lockdown continues to ease.
We've had to be really flexible and adapt with the changing times. None of us really know what this new norm's going to look like. But certainly, we're lucky here with all of the outside space that we have, and we're working very closely with our businesses, particularly our restaurants, in how we can support them so they maximise their trade with as much outside space as possible.
It's takeaway only now. In a few days' time, on-site eating and drinking is due to return. Businesses in places like Duke of York Square here in Chelsea are well set to take full advantage.
Let's come down. The apron goes on.
It won't be like it was before for a while, but England's hospitality sector is spending big to persuade consumers to return. One big pub chain, Punch Pubs, for example, is forking out £1 million on outdoor infrastructure. Analysts are optimistic.
Half of the population of the UK is now vaccinated, which means that inevitably confidence is higher. But also we're a year in and people are desperate to get out. At Springboard, we've seen footfall increase virtually the entire way through the lockdown from week to week, and stores are closed. So people clearly want to go out and are going out, even though there's nowhere to go. So once there is somewhere to go, we're forecasting a big uplift, certainly in the first 2 weeks.
Many venues don't have outdoor space, of course. They'll have to remain shut. And denser urban areas in particular may continue to have less appeal. The return of domestic demand won't offset a lack of international tourists either, so overall volumes are going to be lower. Still, it's an outdoor step in the right direction, amid continued hopes on England's streets that there'll be no going back. Guy Henderson, CGTN, London.
Queen Elizabeth says the death of her husband, Prince Philip, has left a huge void in her life. That's according to her son, Prince Andrew. A special remembrance service has been held at Canterbury Cathedral as the UK observes an official period of mourning. The Duke died on Friday, just months before his 100th birthday. Naweed Jabakal reports.
As the period of mourning in the UK continues, churches across the country have held services to remember the life of Prince Philip. In Canterbury, the spiritual home of the Anglican Church, which Queen Elizabeth heads, its most senior bishop led an emotional tribute.
For the royal family, as for every other, no words can reach into the depth of sorrow that goes into bereavement. We all know that it is not simply a factor of age or familiarity. It is not obliterated by the reality of a very long life remarkably led. Nor is the predictability of death's arrival a softening of the blow. Loss is loss.
Meanwhile, arrangements are being made ahead of Saturday's funeral. Given the coronavirus pandemic, it'll be a relatively low-key affair in Windsor, on the outskirts of London. The event will be televised, though, with millions likely to tune in. Under current lockdown rules in England, only 30 people are allowed at funerals, and so Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he won't attend, to allow a family member to take his place.
He was a remarkable man. I loved him as a father. He was so calm. If you had a problem, he would think about it, and that's the great thing that I always think about, is that he was always somebody you could go to, and he would always listen.
As tributes continue to pour in for the Duke of Edinburgh, the period of national mourning here in the UK will last until the 17th of April and will include the funeral, a ceremony that will require face masks and social distancing, measures we've come to expect in the world of COVID-19. Naweed Jabakal, CGTN, London.
The US trial of Derek Chauvin will enter its third week on Monday. The former police officer was filmed kneeling on George Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes last May. Chauvin denies the murder and manslaughter charges against him. CGTN's Dan William takes us through what to expect from his defence.
After 10 days of testimony, the Derek Chauvin trial is at a crucial point. The former police officer faces murder and manslaughter charges following the death of George Floyd last May. Over the last few days, the prosecution has introduced a number of witnesses and medical experts that have told the court that, in their opinion, the direct cause of Floyd's death was a lack of oxygen and not drugs or heart disease. But it will soon be the turn of the defence to present their case and introduce their witnesses. And local legal experts say it is far too soon to make any assumptions about a possible verdict.
It's going to bring in numerous medical experts who are going to argue that, in fact, at the time that George Floyd was being subdued by Derek Chauvin, he was resisting arrest, he was on drugs, he was ODing, perhaps he was dying from the pandemic at this point. So they're going to try to challenge that. Now remember, in the United States, the prosecution bears the burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody has committed a crime, and it takes all 12 jurors a unanimous verdict to agree on guilt. All the defense has to do is what? Raise reasonable doubt. And I'm going to argue it only has to do it with one juror.
Now, the big question many here are asking, will Derek Chauvin himself take the stand? Local defence attorney F. Clayton Tyler says that's unlikely.
I'd find it very difficult to put him on the stand. And the reason why is, just take for instance, okay, this is 4 minutes in. What were you thinking right now? What were you doing right now? Now this is 5 minutes. He's not moving. Do you see that the examination by the prosecution would just completely annihilate him in terms of his testimony?
This trial has already provided some intriguing moments, not least a police chief testifying against a former officer. But the coming days could prove even more significant. Dan Williams, CGTN, Minneapolis.
Well, that's it for The World Today. Thanks for watching. We're available on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion as well. And, of course, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.